our first in-person Fresh Friday. So I'm Jen Hawkins, the Executive Director of One Neighborhood Builders, and we are so grateful that you all came out today. It's a gorgeous Friday. It's a gorgeous Friday morning, so hopefully we'll be able to go outside and enjoy the weather later. So we are joined by several panelists this morning, and I'm really grateful that folks made time to come out to join us and speak. But before we kind of get going, I just want to say thanks to a few. Here you go. You're okay. It's okay. No, I'm going to walk this way. I'm not interrupting. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So first, I just want to really express my gratitude to Chase Bank. Chase has sponsored this special Fresh Friday. And I really also want to thank JPMorgan Chase, Citizens Bank, who has sponsored this special in-person Fresh Friday, and JPMorgan Chase, who has sponsored our entire Fresh Friday series, our virtual series. And I want to thank the CIC for letting us use this wonderful space. We're here to talk about innovation, and what better location to do it than here at Cambridge Innovation Center. So the digital divide, we talk about the digital divide. I just think it's important to sort of define terms. So it's about having equitable access to high-speed internet and devices so that you have the equal opportunity to learn, to access online healthcare, to have the ability to work from home. All of these things that I think before the pandemic we thought were luxuries. And the pandemic really underscored for us that these are core necessities. You know, you might think, why is One Neighborhood Builders in the business of providing high-speed internet in the community? And you're going to hear about the genesis of that journey and what other communities in the state are doing. But I think it's really important to understand that as a community development corporation, we see the interconnection of all of these issues. And if we aren't a little bit bold, maybe a little bit over our skis, then we're not really doing the hard work. And I'm really proud of the work that my colleagues achieved. And I'm just really impressed by the work that's happening in Newport, in Central Falls, and across the state. So again, thank you for coming out this morning. And I'm going to introduce Keith Kelly, the president of Citizens Bank in Rhode Island, to say a few words. And again, thank you very much for your sponsorship of this special in-person Fresh Friday. Keith?
Absolutely, thank you, Jen. It's great to be here, especially for the first in-person Fresh Fridays event. Citizens is really proud to sponsor this edition of Fresh Fridays, not only because of digital equity is one of the critical issues we're tackling through our own community investments at Citizens, but it's one because we truly believe in the work that One Neighborhood Builders is doing on a daily basis. As Jan said, One Neighborhood's mission complements and directly aligns with our commitment to build stronger communities through partnerships with public, private, and community interests to develop neighborhoods, transform lives, and stimulate economic renewal. The work of One Neighborhood Builders has been transformative over the years. Back in 2009, they were actually named a Citizens NBC 10 Champion in Action. And you may have seen earlier this week that we've been doing, because this is the 20th anniversary of our Champions in Action program, we're highlighting on the Sunrise Shout-Out Show our previous winners for our Champions in Action, and One Neighborhood Builders was highlighted earlier this week. In 2020, Citizens committed over $10 million to drive economic advancement and promote social equity across our national footprint, with a specific focus on increasing digital equity in underserved communities. As part of this commitment, we support programs for one-on-one digital navigation and coaching services, technology resource rooms, and lending libraries. Our investment aims to reduce racial inequities in digital access and provide support for communities to gain skills through necessary to compete for jobs that provide the foundation for long-term economic security and viability. This investment harnesses the bank's resources, expertise, and unique strengths in its culture to help drive real and lasting progress across all the communities that we serve as citizens. This morning we have a great lineup of speakers and panelists that will highlight several neighborhood initiatives that are focused on increasing digital access and equity while also sharing tools and strategies that we can all learn from. I'm also excited to hear about the case study and the publication of the One Neighborhood Connects case study, which is an initiative that provides free Wi-Fi, currently serving 2/3 of all the neighborhood residents in Oneyville, a program that citizens supported starting 3 years ago. So again, thank you all for being here this morning, for the partnership and all that you're doing for all the communities throughout Rhode Island. So with that, Jen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you again, citizens, and Keith, for joining us, and Vanessa. So, without further ado, I'm going to ask the first set of panelists to join me up here on stage, and Bill Bartholomew is going to be moderating. There's Bill, our special podcast extraordinaire, to ask some great questions and hopefully educate all of you on this topic. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. And thanks to our panelists. I think just to keep it moving rather than set it up with full autobiographies, if we could just go through kind of a quick summary of who you are and how you're related to this topic at hand, and we'll just work, I guess, from left to right.
Sure, can you hear me? I'm Brian Thorn. I'm Director of Broadband Strategy with the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation.
Yeah, and I'm Tommy Sheehan. I'm with the Newport Housing Authority. I'm a resident and a resident commissioner.
Maria Rivera, the mayor of the city of Central Falls.
And Jennifer Hawkins, Executive Director of One Neighborhood Builders.
So I guess let's keep it really basic to begin with. What does digital equity mean to you? Let's start with Jen.
You know, it means that parents don't have to be bringing their children to the library or to the parking lot of Panera in order to help do their homework at night.
It means to me that the residents of the city of Central Falls, a low-income community of Black and brown people, are entitled to have the same benefits as the rest of the communities in Central Falls and access to broadband and high-speed internet.
So coming from Newport, I compared it to, we have a beautiful private school, St. George's, and when I was asked what we wanted for our residents, I said what they have. And that's equity. And that's what we got.
For me, I think it means equal access to all of the transformative potentials that are unlocked by broadband access.
So there's a really fascinating case study that took place in Oneyville that's going to be released, I think, in like 5 minutes, but we discussed in depth in a panel following this one. But there's some other interesting things that have taken place in this space, specific examples of where the right people, the right dollar amounts can transform a municipality or region dramatically through the lens of digital equity. Mayor Rivera, let's talk about Central Falls Connect. Talk about that program and where the need was identified and how that challenge was resolved, if it has been resolved.
Sure, thank you. So last month we launched Central Falls Connect. We partnered with Education Superhighway, which is a nonprofit, a federal nonprofit. They reached out to us and said, we want to help your community. After a few conversations with them, we launched it, and I can tell you that at the time when we had the conversation with them, we had 32% of the residents who were signed up for free internet or low-income internet, and as of today, we have over 50% of the community that has signed up. This has happened because we care about the community. We put a team of people together, we're working with the different nonprofits in the city, with the library, with Progreso Latino, with the housing authority, with the school district, making sure that we have direct contacts to the families of the city, letting them know that you qualify for internet. There's no reason for the children at home that have to do their work to not have high-speed internet to do their work. There's no reason for the elderly to be isolated. They should have access to internet to connect to social media, to whatever they want to connect with. They should have the ability to be able to apply for their benefits, for their medical, for their SNAP benefits, because they have high-speed internet, instead of having to go to an office and wait for hours, or be on the phone for hours. For families to connect with their families outside of the country, we have a population of over 70% who are Latinos who have families that are not from this country. And we need to make sure that they stay connected with their families. This has been, it's been a great program for the community. We have someone who sits at City Hall every day, Monday through Friday, just making sure that when residents come in looking for internet, that we have that person there to guide them. We have my chief of staff who goes to the housing authority a few times a week after her job. This is her second job. Making sure that she's helping the elderly, the people who are disabled through the process. So we're just not putting the benefit out there and telling them, this is for you, this is what you have to do. No, we are there to help them through the process. The school district is doing it, the housing authority is doing it, we're doing it at City Hall, we have someone at the library who's helping with this, we have Progreso Latino who's also helping with this. And we're just there to help them. You know, we partnered with Cox and Verizon. So Cox and Verizon have been a huge asset to the city of Central Falls and making sure that all the programs are $30 for free, or under $30 for free.
So basically this program provides credit for up to $30 towards the internet. And it sounds like a major piece of this is outreach, where you have to, look, Mayor, I mean, you do great work in Central Falls, you're probably not going door to door, you know, with your chief of staff alone. You need those partners, those community partners.
Yeah, it's definitely outreach. So I have a weekly newsletter that goes out. It's in the weekly newsletter. We are constantly on social media talking about this. We have people who are working throughout the week just focused on this. So yes, it's definitely the partners that we're working with and the outreach. And I have to say that besides the $30 credit for free internet, they also qualify for $100 off for a free laptop, desktop, or a tablet.
So that's an excellent example of where progress is being made in this sector. Another example is in Newport, where, you know, people may not realize, but internet in Newport is monopolized by one company, Cox, that, you know, it's more expensive than the rest of the state, but it's not necessarily delivering in a competitive way when you compare it to the rest of the state. So I want to talk about the Broadband initiative that took place inside the Newport Housing Authority, Tommy, but also Ryan. You know, this was funded through a grant awarded by Commerce Rhode Island. So let's start with an overview of this. You know, I love that comparison, St. George versus, you know, the rest of the city, and I think that's where you're trying to get to in all senses, not only in access but in terms of quality.
So I got to tell you, you know, I'm just, when I say just a resident, I'm surrounded by directors up here, Director of Commerce with the Broadband. And it started in the pandemic. My sister works at Pell School. She's a social worker there. And I live in the high rise. I looked out and I was wondering what the heck is happening to the kids. They have some hot spots out there. And I know if I was a 12-year-old, heck, when I'm 60, I'm 67 now, if I start buffering, I'm done. So I wondered what we could do. And fortunately, I had an executive director, Rhonda Mitchell, that thought bigger than I did, because I was just thinking of my direct neighborhood. She said, let's see what we can do for the whole community. And we were fortunate. We have the Van Buren Foundation there. They directed me to the OSHEAN people. And, you know, I have no tech experience. I learned about latency a little late in life. So, you know, just the people that I was dealing with were so supportive. And now working with Brian, the opportunities that exist out there and people that really want this to happen, it really is wonderful. And when I think of it, it was myself and my brother wrote the grant, two regular people, and it's amazing what can happen if you can get the residents engaged and really going forward. So lots of support out there.
Yeah, this program, this grant funded the expansion of broadband in 6 buildings inside the Newport Housing Authority. So it's a microcosm of a larger issue, but how can we extrapolate that, Brian, and turn it into impact on a larger scale?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the task of the new Broadband Digital Equity Office at Rhode Island Commerce. And just to take a step back and give some more context there, we really are having a historic opportunity to increase the efficacy of some of this federal money that's going to be coming from the state. We're going to have 5 times the amount of federal money for broadband in Rhode Island than has ever entered the state previously. And what does that mean at the federal level? The bipartisan infrastructure law allocated about $65 billion for broadband efforts. And in the state of Rhode Island, that means we're going to get about $125 million into the state. Now, it's not coming tomorrow, it's a long process, but we're hoping to unlock the first $5 million for planning, for technical assistance, and for mapping. And then after that, we're going to have a 5-year action plan, and that's for the not only the infrastructure deployment piece of Rhode Island's program, but also the digital equity plan. And we're really hoping to learn from Tommy, from Mayor Rivera, from our neighborhood builders, so that we can replicate and scale these really excellent digital equity efforts that are already underway and bring them across the state.
Jen, again, I'll tease the fact that the next panel will be revealing the Onlyville project, so we don't want to dig into it too far here. But I guess in sort of, what have you learned about plugging the big gaps when it comes to digital equity through your work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just even bring us back to what it was like in March of 2020, right? When I just remember being at home and my husband and my daughter and myself were all trying to get online, and just remember thinking how immensely grateful I was that it wasn't hard. And thinking about the community in which I work and spend most of my time in, which is the Onlyville neighborhood, I just felt like if we didn't try something, we were failing our neighbors. And it was, as I mentioned, that sort of somewhat a sense of hubris of just we're going to figure this out, and try to not boil the ocean of we're going to do everything all at once. Really sort of figured, how can we provide free internet to some portion of the neighborhood? And it was out of that genuine sense of desire to do something meaningful, but also intermingled with ignorance, that landed us where we're at. And you'll hear all those details in the next session. But just to respond to your question, we are covering about a third of the neighborhood of Onlyville at this point. About 2,500 households have accessed the internet. And Onlyville, according to census data, was one of the communities with the least percentage of in-home high-speed internet. And we really took advantage of the fact that the geography of Onlyville was such that you could have access points placed on top of roofs and relay the data. Each of the solutions that you're hearing here in Newport, Sunny Falls, and in Onlyville are different. And there is no one-size-fits-all response to broadband, and that, I think, is going to be really important in working with the state in bringing this to other communities to really recognize that each community has to have a different solution. But the fact that the geography of Onlyville is essentially flat, there's not a lot of tall buildings, and because One Neighborhood Builders owns, I think it's 90% of properties, in this very small, dense area, we were able to come up with our Wi-Fi mesh solution. So it's, we're constantly trying to plug additional holes and add additional access points on roofs and monitor where there's gaps and where there's slow speeds and kind of do this patchwork. So it's definitely a work in progress, and the technology changes and evolves so rapidly that you really have to constantly be feeding the network.
And what's interesting, I learned through reporting during the pandemic, especially at the beginning, is that we have challenges in our urban core, no doubt about it, but also throughout rural portions of the state. So you talk about that patchwork, yeah, I mean, every scenario is different, and that leads to a question of, all right, we have all these different scenarios, there's going to be a pile of solutions that are ever evolving because of technology. So I'll ask each of you, we'll go down left to right. What's the grand goal of digital equity, Brian?
The grand goal of digital equity from the standpoint of the Broadband Office of Commerce is to ensure that every Rhode Island resident has access to affordable, high-quality, reliable internet, so that everyone can access some of the benefits Jen described earlier, including telemedicine, education, employment, but also access to civic information. Everyone needs that.
Mayor? Well, we're not going left the road, but I should look up next time. Sorry, Tommy.
Oh, that's right. I got the same goal. So, we're starting with the Newport Housing Authority, but there's lots of properties that abut us, and our goal is to get everyone connected. They have a big North End project coming up right now, and we've been going out and talking to property managers and CEOs, and we believe that we're going to get most of Newport connected within the next, at least the go-ahead to get them connected, and then we'll talk to Ryan.
Mayor?
The goal for me is that no family is connected. I think Central Falls faces different challenges. We have a community who doesn't speak the language, so it's important to make sure that we do the correct outreach to reach out to these families that don't speak the language or who are not computer savvy. That we guide them through the process and make sure that they have that internet connection that they need.
Jen?
So as you point out, there is a difference between the broadband challenges in the rural parts of the state, where there really just isn't fiber to pull from. And then the urban areas where there's loads of fiber underneath the street, but the hurdle is the cost associated with it. And for many households, $30, $50, $130 a month is really difficult. And if you have ever had a challenge in the past where maybe you didn't pay your bill, you're essentially prohibited from opening an account again. And that's a really big issue, being able to actually have the credit and the permission to have an account. So there's that issue that I think we are addressing in Olneyville. The issue around rural parts of the state, I think, is separate and equally vital. But I would say, in summary, we did a proof of concept, and I see the big ask here is that we go out of business, that we're able to have a sustainable broadband solution statewide that is funded like a public utility. So that ultimately, I think, is a solution. And until that point happens, one neighborhood builders will keep hustling to make Olneyville and every community in which we have housing developments have broadband access for our residents. But we do hope that eventually we will no longer need to do that.
What's interesting about this as well is, just quickly, we're not putting people on Mars here. Your project, as I understand, around $470,000 in hard capital costs, $80,000 a year to maintain. So obviously that's one neighborhood. You take the super sector that would be the entire state. It's going to be a lot more, but it's doable.
It's doable. Yeah, it's doable. It is. You know, it's every. I mean, I'm very curious actually how Central Falls was able to take advantage of BEAD funding, correct, to provide internet in Central Falls. But it is very doable. It's not. It's like you said. It's not rocket science, and it's not billions of dollars. It is really just being able to appeal to the generosity of a lot of philanthropic partners to make this possible.
I want to make sure we have time to open up to questions here, and we're, like I said, I've been teasing this second panel here, so you guys better deliver. So that's coming up as well. You know, another thing when we were kind of prepping for this and talking about it is, you know, I was thinking about the smartphone. I was thinking about if you're an entrepreneur, perhaps you have a micro entity, maybe you have a small business, maybe you have a nonprofit, a cause, whatever it may be, and you want to push something out there. There's a digital equity divide when it comes to digital literacy. For example, you know, you got an event like this one. You know, maybe you hop on Canva, make a flyer, you push it out on Instagram stories, Twitter. These are things that some people take for granted now, and there's a major gap there. That's a line in the sand between the haves and have-nots in Rhode Island's entrepreneurial sector that needs to be closed. How do we do it? Brian?
Well, I think you mentioned devices, and I do want to point out that only about 9% of Rhode Islanders have access to the internet via cell phone, and I want to be careful that a cell phone, accessing the internet via cell phone is no substitute for a larger internet device. If anyone's ever tried to fill out a job application, or if you're a student do homework on a phone, especially if it's only one phone in the household, it's an incredible challenge. So I do think there is a digital literacy challenge, as you mentioned, but there's also a device challenge, and that's part of the affordability and adoption piece, and that's something that the Broadband office, we hope to address through our digital literacy.
9%, less than 10% of the state of Rhode Island has access to the internet through a mobile device?
Through only a mobile device.
Only mobile.
So they don't have connection to their home, they can only access it via, yeah.
Still shocking, but not quite shocking as I heard. Tommy, on closing that digital divide in terms of digital literacy, how can that be accomplished?
So we've actually been partnering up with, you know, we're fortunate we have Salve Regina University right next to us. They have students that are always willing. They have to work a couple hours a semester at least, or during a school year, to actually graduate. But and then we partnered up with University of Rhode Island with Cyber Seniors. Van Buren started a program to give out iPads. Really successful program. And they do lots of follow-ups with that. So we're trying to create a program directly with Salve to have students come over and engage with the residents, because it is an issue. And I speak directly about that. I mean, cutting the cable for me was a process. You know, just what you're used to. And we still, when I talk to the residents that are trying to either move on from Cox or they're just not sure about it. So getting some education piece out there is important. And I think the universities are a perfect place for that to happen.
Mayor, something adding to that, the entrepreneurial side of this, but also the connection to family and friends, especially when you're talking about, you know, a large population a large immigrant population, just using WhatsApp, just using Western Union. These are things that some of us take for granted that have changed the relationship for people who live in other countries. How can that divide be closed? And should it be? I assume it should be.
Yeah, so I think education is key. We have to continue educating the community. The residents of Central Falls hear from us a lot on how we can help them using the resources that are available. You know, with this program, we're not just putting it on newsletters on our social media. Every time we have a public event, we have a table there where Suleyman's there with the different staff that's working with this program, making sure that every resident who comes has access to the information, because they don't have access to Facebook or, you know, my weekly newsletter. So it's important for us to try to do whatever we can to get to the residents. We sent out stuff in the mail to all of the residents of the city. So it's just trying to continue to reach out to them as much as we can and giving them the resources that are available, which is hard for our community because it's hard to get to them. There's also a lot of fear in the city of Central Falls because we have a large undocumented community, so that makes it hard for them. There are people who don't want to have access to it because of fear.
Yep. Jen.
Thank you. Just to add additional points to the mayor's comments regarding the factor of fear, it is something that we didn't anticipate. We thought that if you say high-speed free internet, everyone will come running. And that was absolutely not the case. And I think that was one of the greatest lessons that we learned was how crucial outreach was and how we communicated this. In some respects, we're candidly reconsidering the concept of free. I think there is a psychology to having some fee associated with it, even if it's nominal, 99 cents a month, because it's almost too good to be true. Or are you really protecting my privacy? Are you selling me something? So there's that consideration, but also due to the new federal funding, actually community-based internet service providers have to charge a fee in order to be eligible for reimbursement from the infrastructure dollars. So there's a practical side of that consideration too. But I just really want to emphasize how important it was that we had a team of trusted, bilingual, local residents doing the outreach, going to a variety of like the food pantry and the schools and say, here, let me show you how to do this. Let's go. See, when you go to this, you hit the Wi-Fi, it says one MB connect, hit that button. So really trying to help people understand that it was legitimate is a big deal.
Really fascinating stuff on that point. Really interesting. So, all right, at this point, we will invite all of you or any of you who have questions to, we have a roving mic person.
Sweet.
Everyone, thank you. Hi, Brenda from Housing Works, Rhode Island. Brian from Commerce or anyone, I'd love to hear more about the planning process for the spending. And is there a requirement or a set aside for a certain low utilization communities or affordable housing? And thinking with my colleague Jen, should this be something that we push as a priority in the budget moving forward, just so that we make sure everybody gets their fair share?
Yeah, so regarding your planning question, we're at the early phases. So the state has applied for BEAD, Digital Equity Act, and Capital Project Fund monies from the federal government. We have to put together a budget. There's a pretty extensive hearing process. We're still waiting for our acceptance letter from the federal government. But once that money comes in, we're required to have a statewide planning process for developing a broadband infrastructure program. And part of that plan must be a digital equity plan. And staff and commerce are actually being hosted at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. There's a lot of federal support for states to develop these plans. And so we're going to be convening with some partners in New York this weekend to start thinking about how we can have an effective and equitable plan for the state.
Thank you. Good morning. I am Lina Bravo. I work for Providence Public Library. I want first to share that we have been blessed to work in partnership with One Neighborhood Builders. So we have been able to offer digital learning, digital instruction, computer classes, help to use mobile devices, help for residents to connect to health television, and many other needs. Help for parents to navigate and understand how to use the software that the schools are using, like Skyward, in order to understand the progress of their children. So I would say that libraries, we are a key partner because there is still a gap. The resident and a great device, great internet connection, great resources for free, but they still don't know how to access them. They don't know how to turn on the computer, how to move the mouse, how to type in a keyboard. So we can offer that, we can close that gap, ramp up our services. I am a coordinator and a supervisor of a team of about 6 to 10 teachers, but we rely on funding that is not always available. So one of my dreams is that we can participate in that planning process that can to offer that continuous learning support that guarantee that the families will have access immediately to that technology. So I would like to hear a little bit more about the planning process, just to bring that instruction to residents. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, so thank you. So the Office of Library and Information Sciences in Rhode Island is going to be one of our planning partners in that in the digital equity planning process. They're coming to New York with us. But yes, let's exchange contact information because my first priority is learning about what good programs already exist in the state so that I'm not reinventing the wheel, but learning what good programs exist and then trying to scale and replicate them throughout the state.
For many years, the broadband providers have offered a low-cost product for affordable communities. Can you speak to the differences between the broadband that residents need and what those products are and why they haven't been so successful in increasing access to broadband? For anybody.
So I can tell you that in Central Falls it's been a challenge because a lot of the information that comes from these companies to offer their services, there's a language barrier. So everything that's sent to them is in English. They're going to receive this at home, they're going to throw it in the trash. You have to communicate with these residents in their language to understand. But more than that, you need to have like direct contact with them because just receiving a flyer in the mail is not enough. And I have to be honest, I received some of these flyers I have called. It's not always what they send me. You have to read like the language on the bottom to truly understand because there's all these extra charges.
I'll jump in quickly on this one because I've experienced it. You know, when I first started podcasting, I was delivering a newspaper. I was, selling buying a bike and flipping it on Facebook Marketplace, purely hustling. Didn't have a job, just doing it full time without getting paid. So I had this cheap, if you will, internet. And boy, is there a gap between the quality there and what you would get if you paid for it. Middle of the road, never mind premium. So, yeah, it's inexpensive, but there's a major equity gap between those who have discount internet, versus name brand internet, even if it comes through a major provider.
And so I'll echo that. In our building, we only had basically Cox was available. So when we partnered up with OSHEAN, we had the same network. So when I talk about, what do they have and what do we have, it's, we have what they have. So now it is totally equal. Those $30 programs, I was on that for a little bit. And you call them up and go, this isn't really working well. And they go, yeah, you got to upgrade. So they eventually get their money back. So you're getting your $30 back, but you need that other 30 to get back up to like normal kind of speed. And, so that's what I'm at.
Good morning, my name is Sharon Morris, and I commend Jen on the efforts that we're doing in the West End. And I know I personally am listening to the service providers here, and because we've worked around the state, and other than buildings that are one-structured buildings, it's difficult for us to provide internet services to our residents. And I know I've personally reached out to several, so I'm interested to see what you're doing to help some of us affordable housing developers who are throughout the state to be able to provide equitable digital services, because I know I've tried to been running into roadblocks. And so unfortunately I stick with the Cox because they give me free internet for my community rooms. My residents can access it from the community room but not in their apartments. And they've given us free computers and discounted services. And we purchased a hotspot because we're a large customer. But we want to provide services to more families, so I'm curious to see what you're willing to do to get out of your comfort zone to help some of us who are in larger areas to be able to provide the same services that some of the smaller communities are able to provide, because I don't see that happening.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly sorry that there were roadblocks. The Office of Broadband and Digital Equity in the state of Rhode Island is about 3 months old, so part of my task is to remove those roadblocks, so I'd be happy to talk with you about what challenges you faced and how we can overcome them together. But I think the work like what Tommy's doing in Newport is an example of how we can take some action to bring broadband to the communities we described. But again, I'd love to connect with you and hear about what the specific issues were and how we can address them together.
And I'll just add, thank you, Sharon, for coming. Great to see you. I think that every effort should be applauded. So even though you're not currently able to provide in-home internet for every resident, the fact that it's available in the community room and there's hotspot access, every step is a step in the right direction. But I do think that for us to be able to really achieve this at scale, we all can't individually be kind of fighting that battle on our own, right? There's a huge amount of technological know-how that has to occur, and it seems kind of wasteful for us all to be banging our head all by ourselves, figuring out, well, how do we do this? So I do hope that that ultimately is a takeaway, that the lessons that we've derived in our case study and that we collectively have figured out can be compiled through this new office. And congratulations for the state and Commerce for creating an office and hiring Brian, so that we don't all have to figure this out all by ourselves every single time. That's ultimately, I think, an important goal.
Hi, my name is Brianne. I am the Health Systems Transportation Manager at Rhode. I just had a question, Jen. So you have mentioned that if somebody who hasn't paid their bill in the past, they're not able to sign up for the contract. So I guess I'm wondering how you bridge that barrier, especially in a place like Newport where there's limited options.
So for our Wi-Fi project, we have completely bypassed working directly with the provider, with Cox. We're accessing the broadband via our contract with OSHEAN. So individuals who have been kind of prohibited from opening an account due to poor credit in the past, that is no longer a problem. But I think it is a significant barrier. If you are also maybe undocumented and you're fearful of opening credit, those exist. That's how we've overcome it. I don't know if my colleagues want to say anything about that.
So, Suleiman, have we come across residents who have said that they can't be connected or they can't get services because they haven't paid their bill?
I think if they owe more than $500 on their Cox bill, they don't have a problem with getting the service, but other than that, Verizon.
So we really haven't come across that, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. Like, I have a great relationship with Cox and Verizon, so I'm sure I'll be able to compensate just because I've done it with, you know, Marianne today. And I'll tell you what, I have had to call to say, this resident needs services, what can we do to help them, and they work with me. So I'm pretty sure we can work with Cox and Verizon.
Final question?
I'm David Background from Broadband. Our initiative to give Wi-Fi to policy development residents in the city. I work for the city, so there was a collaboration with the city about that road. And the city can leverage good high-speed internet because it also has contracts for its first responders, the police, and fire and so forth. And I was wondering if any of you knew examples of incentives for cities to partner with the CDCs and other nonprofits so that this may be a avenue to access a higher quality and also discounted because we have services, so Cox gave us a discount
So I know the state has a lot of money. Or is getting a lot of money, which is why Ryan is here. But we get connected with Education Superhighway. That's who we worked with. They're a nonprofit. They actually reached out to us because they wanted to help Central Falls, and I'm sure Central Falls is actually the first city in the nation to implement this and get it going with them. And I'm pretty sure that they're looking for many more to work with.
Education Superhighway has reached out to the state as well, and I would say that I'm not sure of any discounts, but there is certainly an opportunity of scale for cities in a region to partner and reduce costs for infrastructure deployment and other programs.
And then my experience was, you know, we're fortunate, we work with OSHEAN. OSHEAN works with our city governments as it is, so they have relationships, right? And then that sort of was above my pay grade, and so they're having those discussions. And and then when it comes to like the $30, that is a discussion that is happening now of how do we pay for it annually. We're fortunate in the way we wrote the grants initially so that we'd be covered. We believe that HUD is going to eventually, because they're already using the words, it's a necessity, right? It's a basic need. And so much like water and electricity. So I think once that sort of happens, and it might take the government a few years to get to that point, that annual fees, particularly for executive directors that go, you know, we want to put something out here, and then go, sorry. So we're getting there. So I think relationships are already formed at your local government. Find out who the provider is.
All right, well, thank you all very much. Ryan Thorn, Director of Broadband Strategy for Rhode Island Commerce, Tommy Sheehan, Resident Commissioner for the Newport Housing Authority, Rivera of Central Falls, and Jennifer Hawkins, President and Executive Director at One Neighborhood Builders. I'm Bill Bartholomew. We are 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes-ish away from our next session here. And thank you all for being here and for participating.
Thanks again for joining us. My name is Grace Evans from One Neighborhood Builders. So grateful to have your participation here this morning. We're excited. Bill did a lot of previewing here for our second conversation, and really excited to dig in a little bit more on One NB Connect's One Neighborhood Builders free community Wi-Fi network. During the discussion earlier, you heard kind of about the big picture. So in this one, we're going to go a little deeper. And as you may have seen when you came to the registration table or in your packet, there's reference to the case study that One Neighborhood Builders has published today, hot off the presses, that also goes into greater detail about the One NB Connects network. So if you're left with questions coming out of today's conversation, or if you want to refer to it during the conversation, please feel free. I also want, before we jump in, to acknowledge that a free mesh Wi-Fi network doesn't just pop up overnight without the help of lots of partners and sponsors, many of whom were referenced during the comments earlier today, but wanted to give a special thanks to the financial sponsors who made One NB Connects happen, and many of whom believed in it when it was really just a dream and an idea. And a full list of all of our sponsors you can find on the poster board by the coffee and pastry table. So please feel free to peruse on your way out. So I'm going to introduce each of our panelists here, and then we'll do some discussion, and we'll similarly save some time for Q&A at the end of our conversation. I'd like to first start with my colleague at One Neighborhood Builders, Antonio Rodriguez. Antonio is an assistant director of real estate at One Neighborhood Builders and has really led the implementation of One NB Connect since its inception in 2020. So Antonio, Jen talked a bit earlier about when One Neighborhood Builders decided to act and to kind of take on this crazy idea of creating a community Wi-Fi network. And then one of the challenges was finding the right technical solution. Can you take us back to 2020 and talk a little bit about how the team landed on a mesh Wi-Fi network as the right way to connect families in Olneyville?
Is this thing on? All right, good morning everybody. Thank you for joining us for the second session and for being attentive. So, wow, take us back to 2020, she says, the year we don't want to remember. But between May and October of 2020, this is gonna be easier. Yeah. Between May and October of 2020, we had a lot of brainstorming going on. We thought of almost every solution because we wanted to. Our intention was to meet the need and not really worry about, at least at the inception, not worry about the implementation. So, you know, we thought about putting a giant 50-foot cell tower in the middle of the neighborhood. That doesn't work in an urban environment. We thought about, you know, buying devices. We thought about getting, you know, connected through Cox and Verizon to try to get discount programs for our residents. But ultimately, when we were connected with OSHEAN, we landed upon sort of the infrastructure. So we found our first step in, and now we needed a way to distribute it to the community, into the neighborhood, and that's when we connected to the folks at Ruckus. We connected with Josh and his team over at Harbor Networks, and we all started to brainstorm and started to think of this great idea that everyone wanted to be a part of, but no one knew if it was going to work. But one of the things that I like to call back to what a panel I was recently in San Diego is to tell people that it's not about doing it right, it's about doing it right now. Because if we start to think about, is this gonna work, is this not gonna work, you're gonna find some of those roadblocks and excuses for not doing it. There's already been a long enough time of folks not doing it. During the former panel, or the previous panel, they mentioned how this is seen as a public utility, or will be seen as a public utility. We definitely need to get there, but the only way we're going to get there is with partners, you know, like OSHEAN, like the state helping us get funding, like Josh and his team at Harbor designing, like Terrence and the folks at Ruckus, making sure that you know, we have what we need, and even some of the folks that are mentioned here, but one of our partners is American Teleconnect Services, and I want to give them credit because without them, we wouldn't have been able to actually implement our radios on our buildings. You know, a design is great, but the implementation and the outcome of that design is what you can measure. So yeah, I just want to thank our partners because although we are the backbone and we are sort of driving this thing, it's because of our partners that we were able to implement this. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonio. And we'll talk in a little bit exactly how this mesh Wi-Fi network that we keep referring to actually works. But first, I want to introduce our other panelists. So next up, I'm pleased to introduce David Marble, who's the president and CEO of OSHEAN. David, what is OSHEAN? And how does supporting projects like 1MB Connects relate to your broader mission as an organization?
There's a great movie called Office Space. If you haven't seen it, you go see it. And the guy goes, "What is it you do?" So one of the things about OSHEAN is we are an oddity at some level until you peel back the onion. So we are a nonprofit service provider that works on behalf of the nonprofit community in the state. And it turns out that there are 40 plus of us around the country in different states that operate like OSHEAN. Right? We are a 501c3 nonprofit, just like many of you who are sitting in the audience are, right? And so across the nation, we support 150,000 community anchor institutions across the country, and nobody's ever heard of any of us because we don't advertise and we don't do a lot of that, right? Yet when you peel it back, you realize that the infrastructure that we have built here in Rhode Island is one of the things the state's most proud assets. It's an extraordinary fiber optic based infrastructure. If you looked at OSHEAN's membership, you would see the embodiment of digital equity initiatives. We have Brown University, who has 315 people in IT, right? And all the way down, Lifespan here in New England, right? You know, run on the OSHEAN infrastructure. And we're doing One Neighborhood Builders and Newport Housing Authority and the Newport Preservation Society and some of that, quote, have-nots, and trying to build them into an infrastructure of equity. And that equity gets very technical, but most of this stuff that we're talking about today is not technical. It's people. And my shout out right now is to Tommy and Jen, right? OSHEAN can build the best infrastructure in the world, but if we don't have you to engage with, you know what I knew when Neighborhood Builders was going to work? Was when you called me at 6:30 and I was standing in my driveway with doing something, and you wanted to tell me what was going on at that particular time in the project. That's when I knew we had a partner that we could execute with. Because I have no question about whether or not we can actually provide this. It's can we get the engagement at the membership level, right? And sometimes at the organizational level. So we provide, we have about 160 members in our community. Like I said, all the way from Brown and Care New England and Lifespan to all of the libraries. And we try to do things on demand. So we had the pandemic pop up, right? Found a way to get a small little grant and built 70 Wi-Fi library parking lots so that people could pop over to the library parking lot. To this day, that is getting now up to well over 10,000 connections a month in the library parking lot, even today, now that the library is open, right? So there's after hours, there's all sorts of things that will allow that to happen and becomes a utility, right? So we're trying to understand that opportunity, and I believe that what we've done with MB and what we've done with Newport Housing can be a template for the rest of the state. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, David. For those of us like me who are not technically inclined, it was very helpful for me to understand OSHEAN owns the stuff in the ground, right? The middle mile provider, the stuff, the tubes, that's what the internet is, right? And the trick is then making the connection between what's in the ground and what's above ground, which is people. And that's where the partnerships come in.
It's actually more confusing when you actually know what's in the ground. It's a 62-micron piece of glass.
I'd like to remain ignorant, please. Thank you. I'd like to now introduce our final panelist, Josh Lee, who's the wireless practice lead at Harbor Networks. Josh, working for a communications and IT systems firm, my guess is that most of your clients are not community development corporations. How did you get roped into this work? And were there any ways that it was different from some of your usual projects?
So, being an engineer on the RF side, we do large-scale projects. We do small-scale projects. We do community projects. I've done campus and citywide projects, but this differed in its approach. It was very purpose-driven. And I liked how you said that I was roped into it, and that's because we talked previously, and that's eloquently stated, because I was very hesitant about this in the beginning when Jen and Antonio talked to me. I went to my VP of engineering and said, do you really think we should go about doing this? Should we take this on? And he said, no. No, we shouldn't. From a business perspective, this is a bad idea. They don't seem to have a full scope like we're used to, and so we really should scale back and have someone else take care of it. And someone at Ruckus twisted my arm and said, you really need to look at this again because what they're going for is very unique and you need to be a part of it. And I know with Ruckus we can do it. So I'm really glad that my arm got twisted because it really turned out to be a good opportunity. But it's more than just providing utility for enterprise markets that we're used to. It really filled the need, and during the height of the pandemic, it couldn't have met the need better. So it was something that I was really appreciative to be a part of. Despite the uncertainties of the scope, when I realized what their goals were, it was very easy for me to come on board and feel that good.
Thank you. And I want to stay on you for a minute, Josh, actually. So this is where I wanted to do just a little bit of technical stuff. So we talked about OSHEAN owning the glass 62 whatever things you just said in the ground. That's right, David? Yeah. How does it actually work to build a mesh Wi-Fi network? What are the core components, and say it like I would understand, and you just heard me refer to it.
So building on the 62 microns, I can deal with 60 meters.
Yes.
No. Yes, exactly. So, I mean, it's amazing how many wires are required to make wireless work. It really is. It requires a tremendous amount of cabling and wire infrastructure. But a mesh network is simply a connection of access points that creates a blanket coverage of Wi-Fi. Wherever they are, wherever that coverage exists, they get the same experience everywhere. There's redundancy built in for failovers, but really all it comes down to is an environment where you walk inside a building, you know you're going to get the same experience everywhere. In a mesh environment that's typically deployed outside, you know you're going to get that same experience everywhere in that mesh environment.
Thank you.
I will say that, you know, when we talk about all networks not being the same, I actually had some battles at the State House when they were building the broadband office building that Brian became part of, right? Because they kept wanting to put the speed in the bill, right? I said, that's going to last till tomorrow. If you put the, you know, 100 over 25 or whatever that speed calculation is, don't put it in the bill because it's going crazy, the speed and the requirement for speed, right? Now, so some of the things that Tommy talked about, right? How do we educate our populace that now has this, you know, great internet connection to maybe not have to buy, you know, cable TV because they can stream. Well, that streaming requires a level of bandwidth, a low level of connectivity in the network. So, for example, Netflix, you know, everybody watches Netflix. Well, we take what these guys aggregate at the wireless level, bring it into our networks, and feed a caching system here in Providence so that they don't have to go over the public internet to get their Netflix title. Well, it works way better because it's connected locally, it's on fiber straight into to Harbor's, you know, Wi-Fi infrastructure, and it just flat out works better. And that's the way the networks are going. It's very complex. All the smart guys that work at OSHEAN in the background and at your place, and you know, can put it all together. But it ultimately becomes how the applications work that make the difference.
And so let's talk about speed a little bit. You raised it, David. We hear high-speed internet all the time, and there's a federal definition, and there's also the experience that people have and their preference as it relates to high speed. Antonio, can you talk a little bit about the initial speeds when 1MB Connects was rolled out, and then the expansion that happened earlier this year, and why that was an important step for us to take as a partnership?
Absolutely. So for phase one, if you will, we had gone with a 20 megabits up-down speed, rate limited speed per device. So that meant every device that was connected to the network would get up to 20 megabits per second, up, down, and that was supposed to be sufficient for you to be able to do Zoom calls for telehealth or digital learning. It was supposed to be sufficient for you to use for some streaming services, you know, you the YouTube, the Netflix. But what we quickly learned was that the devices that they use matter, and the first panel did bring up that point. You know, older devices have a harder time finding the network. Older devices have a hard time staying consistently connected to the network. And someone mentioned latency in the first panel, and that's a part of latency, is that ability to connect consistently without interruption. So for phase two, we knew we had to make an upgrade, and we didn't know where we wanted to be in terms of like what was going to be our speed. We knew that we weren't going to sort of compete with the ISPs, because when Neighborhood Builders has no intention of being an ISP. We're here to serve a need, and we're going to continue to do that in the best to our capacity. So we went up 100 megabits up, down, and that's you know, a 10-time or a 5-time increase in what we had before, and it's able to get more individuals connected. And I can talk a little bit about phase two. I don't know if we want to get into that now.
Sure.
But just to give you guys an idea of what phase one looked like at an infrastructure level, we had about 12 different buildings transmitting about 24 radios as our access points. We did a heat map, which is basically a fancy word for saying we test them. It's what you see when Verizon and T-Mobile does their coverage maps. It's the same thing. And we saw that there were gaps. So for phase two, we wanted to eliminate those gaps and strengthen the network in the entire catchment area So we went from 24 devices that were transmitting to 55. We more than doubled the number of devices in the neighborhood. We wanted to more than double the amount of individuals that can access it, and we've definitely made a lot of progress. When we first built the network, it was sort of, like Jen had mentioned, you know, it was a little bit of hubris and ignorance in thinking that if we built it, folks would just connect to it and say, hey, it's free, it's for me. And she also mentioned fear, and that was a big part of it. Outreach was another major component. We knew we had to invest in doing community outreach and getting it in front of individuals directly, as opposed to just getting them the information to connect. And in phase 2, from phase 1 to phase 2, I mean, I think we've seen great progress. We've had over 2,600 unique IP addresses connect to the network in about a 2-year span. So it's remarkable to see that more individuals are starting to use it as we start to do this outreach, as we start to put the word out. I think this event is really going to bring a big attention to what we do in the neighborhood, and as people come to visit, they can connect and say, hey, yeah, you know what, it does work here. How can I get involved? How can it work in my community? And how can I bring it to my community in an effective, you know, financially feasible way?
Thank you, Antonio. And I want to come back in a minute to some of the people in the community who've been able to use the network to meet some of their needs. But first I wanted to ask you, Josh, Antonio was just speaking about how the phase 2 expansion, the goals were really to both close gaps, so places that there might be, you know, what you might think of as dead zones in the community, and also to increase speeds. You mentioned a little bit earlier that it's way different to put Wi-Fi into an office building than into a sort of, you know, out into the environment in a community. Can you talk about how those differences look from a user experience, and how that phase 2 expansion was able to kind of get over some of those barriers or those challenges that exist because it's out, you know, in the environment essentially?
So some of the differences is when you're dealing with an indoor space, indoor office space, or, you know, even an apartment building, you have walls, you have a finite space, you have a floor plan to work with. So you know how far you need to go. You know what your boundaries are, your borders. You know where you need to design from. And users know they're in those 4 walls. They know once I step out, wireless is no longer expected to be out here, but yeah, it may bleed out a little bit. Very different in the outside environment because you have trees, you have buildings that you're not accounting for, you have people take up signal strength, you have big buses and trucks moving by, you have everything in the environment that is dynamic, not to mention the weather. So one of the key elements was primarily dealing with the technology. With Ruckus as a manufacturer, penetration through the buildings is substantially better than any other. So that was leaning on that technology is really a key component. Not every manufacturer is made the same. You can't just buy any access point and expect to have the same results. It was brought out in the onset that one neighborhood builder said explicitly, we do not want to put anything inside. Even though I said, we really should. And they said, no. So we said, okay, we'll figure out the next best solution. And that really did work because working with the team, we were able to decide what buildings they owned, what buildings we could mount equipment on, and use those as sort of mini cell towers or access point towers, and be able to propagate the signal through the buildings. And that really gave us the boundaries that we needed. That boundary, we were able to build ourselves. The boundaries were built by how many areas in the neighborhood we wanted to service, the budget involved, and how much hardware we had on hand. So that really kind of drove the differentiator, but I was able to bring it back to something that I was much more familiar with. I do a lot of outdoor Wi-Fi space, but again, going back to how it was funded and how the concept was created helps me to understand how I should design it in that approach. Now, going back to filling in coverage gaps and building up that speed again, what you have to understand is there are two solutions in this project. There is the access points that are client-facing. Clients connect to it with their devices. Then there is the backhaul solution. Both are over wireless technology. One is much higher frequency, but that basically takes place of the fiber. It's a virtual fiber over the air, but a very different frequency and a much higher speed. So they can give you that gigabit speed to be able to service to each one of those kind of root buildings. That's very expandable because that gives us the ability to build out from those root sites. They had 2 fiber root buildings, and being able to build out from there without adding latency, making that user experience as high as possible, while still being able to kind of spread out in that neighborhood, gave us the ability to really spread out, and it gives them the ability to expand on it in the future without a forklift upgrade. So those 2 manufacturers, those solutions together really were able to fill the gap and bring that data rate really high.
Thank you. I have just 2 more quick questions for the panel here, and then we're going to shift to Q&A. So start thinking about your questions as you have them. First, for Antonio, Josh just talked about the efforts to kind of expand the access for members of the community. You have been working with the One Neighborhood Builders team more broadly to ensure that folks in the community are aware of this resource and then are able to be supported in navigating it. Can you talk a little bit about that work and some of the folks who have been able to use the network and how it's impacted them?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, it primarily has to do with outreach. And Mayor Hawkins mentioned how it really requires individuals in the organization and in the community to be your champions for what you're doing. And that's, and, you know, we took that route. We saw champions in our neighborhood. We reached out to them. We said, hey, please help us get this to the community. Neighborhood organizations, you know, like Jen mentioned, the library, the food pantry, all these small businesses. We had our flyer posted on their windows, on their storefronts, and they did not hesitate to help us get that service out to the community, especially during COVID. And one of the things that you'll see him in the case study if you take a look at it. His name's one of our residents' name is Harry, and I always think about him when we think about how much of an impact we've had in the community, because during COVID, like many of us, Harry lost his brother, and he supports his mother, who's an elderly woman. She's, I think, 89 this year, so she's very, you know, in need of support to get around, to do everything, and her and Harry were taking care of his brother, who was very ill, and unfortunately, during COVID, he passed away. And our network was literally their solution to connect them to telehealth, to connect them during the wake and during the funeral with their family overseas, so that they can share in that moment that, you know, you guys can be here too. And I know a lot of us went through that, and that was very critical for us to be able to do to the community. As Jen mentioned, we were stuck in place during that time, and it felt very easy for us to think like everyone's situation is the same, but it wasn't. And I'm glad that we were able to meet that need, and that we had that story from you know, one of our residents. Another one that I will share is recently, one of our residents has fallen in hard times, and she texted me a few weeks ago and she said, hey, I know that the Wi-Fi is in the neighborhood. I have to lower my expenses. I'm cutting off my Verizon, I need to connect to the network. She connected within minutes and she texted me back, she said, I'm calling them now, I'm canceling. I'm online, I could you know, apply for my unemployment, I could do what I need to do, and it's because of you guys. I saved that.
Thanks, Antonio. And thanks for kind of making it, helping us all understand how real this is, that this is impacting people's lives on a day-to-day basis. And I want to ask you, David, as the last question I have for the panel, zooming way back out and back up. You know, we've heard about the 1NB Connect solution, heard about some other solutions earlier today for addressing the digital divide. What are some other things that, from either policy levers or pilot interventions like this or technical solutions that you think should be on our radars that maybe we haven't spoken about yet today?
Well, I'm pretty passionate about this idea of digital transformation. If you haven't noticed, there's this whole thing going on, right? And so we didn't even mention so far cybersecurity, right? So if we're creating digital citizens at various levels, right, and we're trying to close the gap, well, are we educating our citizens on things like cybersecurity, data privacy, and all of the things that go along with advancing along the digital equity gap and inclusion. I don't know if you know, but there is digital equity problems and digital divides at research institutions for universities. The haves and the have-nots. The Ivies, like Yale and Brown, have supercomputers, right? Well, Stonehill doesn't. Well, they have 5 genomics researchers at Stonehill, and they can't get access because they don't have supercomputing. So there's digital equity gaps throughout, right? And I have a slide that I've been giving on cybersecurity, right? And so it's got 4 icons, in the front. The first one is the ignorance one, right? That's the one with the head in the sand ostrich, right? And then and so some of those sort of ignorant side of cybersecurity is not just like I don't want to deal with it or whatever, is I don't want to know the answer, right? I don't want to be, because I don't want to move into the next phase, which is the clown, that is the negligence phase, right? I know the problem, but I don't want to address it, and therefore I'm negligent, right? So, and as you move up, eventually you've got a superhero that's doing it right? And there, you said something really great. You said, applaud the efforts, applaud all the efforts that we're doing right now. And there is no, I've been in this for 40 years now, and Mark, sitting there, like a couple of us have been in this for 40 years. I've never seen a one-size-fits-all in any aspect of any of these solutions over the years, right? And so doing the little pieces that move us along, and start to build that gap and recognize the gap in the first place, and start to be creative but activist in trying to solve the problem, that's when you actually make the answer, what you're looking for. I could do a poll, but that's probably, who knows what city and town in Rhode Island, if I project, say, a year from now, what city and town is going to have the best connectivity in the state?
Block Island.
It's going to be Block Island. And you sit there and go, that's going to be amazing. Block Island is going to have the best connectivity of anywhere in the state. And, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, they didn't have anything. They had right? But they had a Deepwater wind project, and all of a sudden there was fiber going under the water, and they contracted with OSHEAN, and now every home on the island, every business, every home, and we've already done the schools and that kind of thing are going to be connected directly via fiber. It will be one of the only places. And so if you think you can't do it, talk to Amy Land out in Block Island. Amy Land is the Jen Hawkins of Block Island. She was the tenacious. Yeah, I know we need to do this strategically for my community, right? And that's why it got done.
Thank you, David. We have a few minutes for questions before we have some closing remarks. My colleague Dennis has a mic. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand.
So how do you define engagement in terms of the community? That what is the feedback mechanism for how you know that people are engaged, and how can you measure that moving forward in terms of where you want to get to, in terms of the difference that it makes? It's sort of like, how do you know that they've heard your message, and how do you then translate that engagement into action?
So first, we ask. We ask the community if they're aware. Currently, through the support of our community health workers, we're able to do outreach pretty consistently, and we have seen spikes in usage because of those, bursts of outreach at different times during the day, trying to meet. I mean, Dennis here, who's doing the running of the mic, he went out and he saw the impact. Over like one day, they were able to connect. Was it like 15 people or so? Like they on their porch in their house, they connected them to the network, and now those folks know that it exists. So it's a very iterative process. There's no, I guess, North Star, if you will, to say, oh my gosh, we made it there, and we're gonna just consistently do this. No. we're going to keep making it to the next level and continue to push what we're able to offer to the community in every way that we can.
I think it's like getting a callback or a proactive call. It's not, we can see it almost immediately, right? Don't be afraid of the technology. This guy over here, we can solve the technology issues, right? We can figure that out. But just having that, you know, call, proactive. So we have a lot of projects, and I know you've got a lot of projects on your plate, right? But I hate to say squeaky wheel, but it is, right? It's like keeping them at a project level, saying this is important. What do you need from us next? You know, that kind of thing. And then you'll find an unbelievable level of support from people like this. You know, our partners are wildly engaged if we know we've got somebody to talk to.
Maybe one more question. We told you everything you would ever want to know.
I will say at the engagement side of things is also the money aspect. Is understanding how many buckets of money there are out there. We don't do a good job at the state level. Brian's really going to start helping us in that area, coordinating the opportunities for the dollars. But you guys in your community know dollars and where they come from and how you can, right? I mean, again, it was Tommy and his brother and Mark and his team that like helped work on that creation. There are lots and lots of buckets of money from lots and lots of areas. We're doing projects that are, you know, recovery, you know, COVID recovery fund money in municipalities. We're doing all sorts of things in all sorts of different buckets of money. So that's the other part of the engagement model that I think is critical, is understanding where and what the opportunity is to get money.
Thank you, and thank you to all of the members of the panel here, Antonio Rodriguez from One Neighborhood Builders, Josh Lee from Harbor Networks, and David Marble from OSHEAN. And we're going to stay seated for a minute here, so we just have very brief closing remarks. Jen, right behind you.
Yes, before we go out into this sunny day and enjoy the weekend, I just wanted again to say thank you very much, everyone, for coming this morning and learning and asking great questions. And I'm so grateful for the panelists and the panelists earlier. I know the mayor had to leave, but just again, thank you. And please grab a case study. And I want to give our last words to Amy Walsh from JPMorgan. She and JPMorgan Chase has sponsored our Fresh Friday series. Shout out to our next Fresh Friday. We'll be back on Zoom starting on December 2nd, and that will feature our participatory budgeting process. So please tune in to all of our Fresh Fridays, and thank you again. Amy?
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm Amy Walsh. I work in the commercial bank at JPMorgan Chase, and this has been an absolute inspiring and educational event for me. I just had a couple of takeaways before I share our corporate comments, but I thought 10,000 people accessing Wi-Fi from library parking lots was pretty amazing to me. And so I think in this season of gratitude that, you know, in your sharing your gratitude for having Wi-Fi and, you know, what the ripple effect of that has been is just outstanding. So I applaud your efforts and all of the partners that have made this possible. I also learned about language challenges associated with connection and how important it is for not only the education and workforce development for all of the businesses that our commercial bank clients want to hire, but it's a health and safety issue. So I think getting to your doctor's appointments and making sure that folks are able to call when they need help and having the right connection is vitally important. And so that was kind of my personal comments. And I just want to say thank you to all of you for this important connection. At JPMorgan, we think it's important to help highlight this innovative work that One Neighborhood Builders and others have done to help build vibrant and sustainable communities. Through One NB Connect Wi-Fi service, and as lead convener of the Central Providence Health Equity Zone, One Neighborhood Builders is building and creating synergies between affordable housing, residential engagement, and community health. Just amazing infrastructure that you're
Fridays and to create spaces to have conversations like this and connect corporate partners in government, in the private sector, and just coming together to help our community. So I would encourage all of you to just spread the word of what's happening here with your family and friends and folks that you see over the holidays, because we